October 24th, 1944, 08:47 hours. The Philippine Sea, east of Leyte Gulf. From the cramped confines of the submarine I-56, Commander Teresa Komatsu pressed his eye against the periscope's rubber eyepiece, his breath catching in his throat. The carefully calibrated optics revealed a sight that defied all operational briefings and intelligence assessments. The horizon, from north to south, was not a line where sea met sky, but a solid, moving wall of warships. It was an armada of a scale he could not have imagined in his most pessimistic forecasts. He began a methodical count, his training taking over, but the numbers quickly became meaningless. 30 vessels, then 50. Then he abandoned the count altogether. It was an endless procession of gray steel, a floating city of American industrial power cutting through the Pacific swells. His order to the radio operator was clipped, the steadiness in his voice a thin veneer over a rising tide of dread. Send an immediate flash transmission to Combined Fleet Headquarters. Enemy fleet sighted. Size is unprecedented. Admiral Kurita must be informed at once. The young operator, his face pale in the submarine's dim light, hesitated. Sir, what numbers should I report? What is the count? Komatsu took one last, long look through the periscope, watching the formidable silhouettes of fleet carriers, battleships, and cruisers glide past. He saw not just ships, but the terrifying culmination of a nation's total war effort. Do not report numbers, Komatsu finally said, his voice low. Tell them we have awakened a sleeping dragon, and we are about to learn the terrible price when America brings its full, unbridled industrial might to bear upon us. The message, tinged with a poetic despair that was highly uncharacteristic of a military communication, was encrypted and sent. The Japanese High Command was about to receive a lesson that would shatter their strategic paradigm, revealing the catastrophic depth of their miscalculation regarding the nature of modern industrial warfare. 9:12 hours, October 24th, 1944. The bridge of the heavy cruiser Otago, flagship of the Center Force. Admiral Kurita, a seasoned and aggressive commander, read the decoded message from I-56 3 times. Each reading deepened the furrow in his brow. He finally slid the flimsy paper across the chart table to his Chief of Staff, Rear Admiral Tomiji Koyanagi. This cannot be accurate, Kurita stated, his tone flat with disbelief. Komatsu claims to have observed over 100 vessels in a single formation. Our most recent intelligence summaries placed total American strength in the entire Philippine archipelago at no more than 40 capital ships. This is a fantasy. Koyanagi studied the message, his expression growing grim. Perhaps, Admiral, the submarine commander has mistakenly included the escort screen. Destroyers, destroyer escorts, auxiliary vessels. They can be difficult to distinguish in a hasty observation. He specifically identifies 6 fleet carriers, Koyanagi. 6, Kurita counted, his voice rising slightly. We confirmed the sinking of 4 American fleet carriers at the Philippine Sea battle just months ago. By what sorcery can they now deploy 6, plus supporting battleships and cruisers numbering in the dozens? Where did these ships come from? The answer, unknown to Kurita, was not sorcery, but the relentless, humming efficiency of American shipyards, a reality Japanese naval intelligence had utterly failed to comprehend. While Japan's own naval construction had ground to a near halt by 1942, crippled by critical material shortages and strategic bombing, American industrial complexes had shifted into a gear of production that seemed to defy the very laws of economics. Over the next few hours, a cascade of confirmations flooded in, each report more alarming than the last. Submarine I-45 reported sightings of 18 carriers, a number so absurd Kurita initially dismissed it as a transmission error. I-58 radioed in, counting battleship formations of 12 vessels. I-54's transmission was the most chilling in its simplicity. American fleet strength exceeds all previous estimates by a factor of 3 or more. A coordinated picture of overwhelming force was emerging, and it painted a future of certain disaster for the Imperial Japanese Navy. 1400 hours, October 24th, 1944. The Underground Command Center, Navy Ministry, Tokyo. In the Warren-like reinforced concrete bunker beneath Tokyo, Admiral Soimu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, convened an emergency conference. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that went beyond the usual stress of command. Present were Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, Chief of the Naval General Staff, and Rear Admiral Sokichi Takagi, the Navy's most respected operations analyst. "Gentlemen," Toyoda began, spreading the submarine reports across a large table, "we are confronted with information that systematically contradicts every intelligence assessment we have made since the outset of this war. Either our submarine captains have collectively lost their minds, or our fundamental understanding of the enemy's capability is catastrophically, perhaps fatally, flawed." Rear Admiral Takagi, who had spent over a year painstakingly analyzing intercepted economic data and neutral source reports on American production, spoke with the grim authority of a man whose repeated warnings had been ignored. "Admiral Toyoda, I have been cautioning since mid-1943 that our intelligence estimates were not merely optimistic, but dangerously delusional. American shipyards do not operate on principles we recognize. They are not building warships, they are manufacturing them, employing assembly line techniques and a workforce of millions. They treat capital ships like mass-produced automobiles." Fukudome interjected. "But the losses at Philippine Sea were confirmed. Those carriers are at the bottom of the ocean. And they have been replaced, and then some," Takagi stated flatly. "The Essex-class fleet carriers are being commissioned at a rate of nearly 1 per month. The smaller Independence-class light carriers are being launched even faster. While our finest engineers struggle for months to patch the battle damage on Shokaku and Zuikaku, the Americans are launching brand new, more advanced carriers every 30 days. It is a quantitative advantage that is rapidly becoming a qualitative one." Admiral Toyoda stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the summarized numbers. They told a story for which Japanese naval doctrine had no counter. In December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy boasted 10 carriers against America's 7 in the Pacific. Now, in October 1944, Japan could muster only 4 operational carriers, 2 of which were so bereft of trained pilots they were little more than floating decoys. The Americans, according to these converging reports, were operating over 30 carriers of various classes in the Pacific theater alone, with an entire additional fleet in the Atlantic. "How?" Toyoda asked, the single word heavy with the weight of dawning realization. "How did we miscalculate so profoundly?" Takagi produced a thick folder, his personal compilation of evidence. "Admiral, in 1943, American industrial output for war materials alone surpassed Japan's total production for the entire war to that date. In 1944, they have dwarfed even that figure. They are building Liberty cargo ships, vessels larger than our destroyers, at a rate of 1 every 4 days from single shipyard complexes, and they have dozens of such complexes." He laid out grainy photographs sourced from neutral maritime journals, the vast basins of Bethlehem Steel's Four River Shipyard, the multiple dry docks at Newport News, the sprawling facility at Mare Island. Each image showed multiple capital ships in simultaneous stages of construction, like skeletons in a mechanical womb. "We constructed the Yamato, the pinnacle of our naval engineering, over 4 years, consuming the resources of our entire nation," Takagi continued, his voice relentless. "The Americans laid down the keel for the battleship USS New Jersey and launched her in 18 months, with 5 sister ships following in the same time frame. While we concentrated our industrial soul on 2 super battleships, they mass-produced 24 modern battleships, dozens of carriers, hundreds of destroyers, and thousands of support vessels. We are not fighting a navy. We are fighting the entirety of American industry. Fukudome's face had lost all color. Then, the Show 1 operation. Our forces are sailing into a numerical disparity that no amount of tactical genius or samurai spirit can overcome. Takagi delivered the final, crushing blow. Admiral Kurita will not face 40 American ships. He will face a fleet of over 200. Every assumption, every casualty projection, every strategic premise upon which this operation was based is wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Toyoda sank into his chair. The physical movement signaled a profound psychological shift. Then we have already lost this war, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We lost it the moment we triggered a conflict with a nation whose industrial capacity we failed, in our hubris, to even measure correctly. Outside the sealed conference room door, junior staff officers continued to push markers across situation maps, their movements based on data that was already obsolete, planning for a battle that had been lost before the first shot was fired. October 25th, 1944, 0630 hours, the Sibuyan Sea. Admiral Kurita's center force, now committed to its desperate thrust through the Philippine Islands to attack the American invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf, sailed into what would become a textbook demonstration of American naval air power. The next 8 hours would provide the Japanese command with a devastating, real-time education. At 0810 hours, the radar operators aboard Kurita's flagship, the Otago, detected the first blips of incoming aircraft. The initial count was 48 planes, a manageable expected carrier strike package. All ships to air defense stations, combat air patrol, intercept bearing 090, Kurita ordered. But the radar screens told a different, more horrifying story. The initial formation was merely the vanguard. Behind it, at precise intervals, new contacts appeared. Then more, and more still. Lieutenant Commander Otani Tanisuke, the fleet's air defense coordinator, watched his screen with mounting horror. Sir, I am tracking multiple sequential formations, 5 separate strike groups, each comprising 40 to 50 aircraft. That's impossible, Koyanagi snapped. No carrier group can launch that many sorties simultaneously. They would require multiple coordinated task forces. Exactly, sir, Otani replied, his voice hollow. We are not engaging one American task force. We are engaging several, operating in concert. The first wave hit at 0827 hours. The coordinated attack was a masterpiece of destruction. TBF Avenger torpedo bombers skimmed the wave tops, while SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers plummeted from the zenith. F-6F Hellcat fighters strafed anti-aircraft gun positions with ruthless efficiency. The volume of fire from the American planes was overwhelming. The battleship Musashi, the sister ship to the legendary Yamato, and considered all but unsinkable by her designers, absorbed her first bomb hit at WEO 835. A torpedo slammed into her port side minutes later. Then another bomb. Then 3 more torpedoes in rapid succession. From the bridge of the Otago, Kurita watched in stunned silence as the Musashi's anti-aircraft batteries blazed away, downing several American aircraft. But for every plane that spiraled into the sea, 5 more pressed home their attacks with terrifying determination. Second wave incoming, Otani reported at 0945. 50-plus contacts bearing 115. Before that wave could even arrive, a third and then a fourth appeared on the radar scopes. The American carrier aircraft were arriving in a continuous, unrelenting relay, granting the Japanese fleet no respite, no opportunity for damage control, no chance to regroup. Aboard the heavy cruiser Maya, Captain Ranji Oi recorded in his log, "We are being assailed by what appears to be an inexhaustible supply of enemy aircraft. Our anti-aircraft ammunition is being depleted faster than our crews can resupply the batteries. We are facing the prospect of becoming defenseless, not for a lack of guns, but for a lack of shells." The mathematical foundations of Japanese naval aviation were collapsing. Their doctrine, based on their own limited capabilities, assumed a carrier could launch perhaps 2 major strikes per day before requiring extensive rearming and pilot rest. The Americans were demonstrating a sortie generation rate that seemed supernatural. Their carriers were functioning as floating, unsinkable air bases, cycling fresh squadrons to maintain constant, unbearable pressure. At 11:34 hours, the Musashi shuddered under her 19th torpedo hit. The magnificent 73,000-ton battleship, protected by 16-inch thick armor, was listing grievously, her speed reduced to a crawl. "How many carriers are out there?" Kurita demanded, his frustration boiling over. The communications officer, Lieutenant Shimada, consulted the fragmented intelligence. "Sir, radio intercepts suggest strike aircraft from at least 12 different hulls. Task groups 38.2, 38.3, and 38.4. Our intelligence estimated 3 to 4 carriers per group." 12 carriers. Koyanagi repeated slowly, the number itself a death sentence. "Coordinating simultaneous, sustained strikes. That is more fleet carriers than we have possessed in our entire naval history, combined." At 13:15 hours, Kurita made the most difficult decision of his career. He ordered the center force to reverse course. It was a temporary retreat from the aerial onslaught that was systematically annihilating his fleet. His after-action report to Tokyo was a masterpiece of understated despair. Enemy air power vastly exceeds all intelligence estimates. Sustained attacks from dawn to present. Own forces have expended 70% of anti-aircraft ammunition. Musashi heavily damaged and sinking. Heavy cruiser Myoko crippled. Without fighter cover, penetration to Leyte Gulf will result in destruction of entire force. In Tokyo, Admiral Toyoda read the report and summoned Takagi once more. "Your assessment?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Takagi presented a consolidated report from all fronts. "Admiral, the pattern is universal. American carrier air groups appear to operate over 100 aircraft per vessel compared to our 50-60. Their ability to sustain high-tempo operations exceeds ours by an order of magnitude. Crucially, they possess the ships, the fuel, the munitions, and the replacement pilots to maintain this tempo across the entire Pacific theater simultaneously." He paused. "Sir, we estimated American production was perhaps double our own. We were wrong. It is an entire magnitude greater, 10 times, perhaps more. They are not merely outproducing us. They are operating on an industrial scale that renders our entire war effort strategically insignificant." Toyoda looked out the window towards the scarred city. Then Admiral Yamamoto was more correct than he could have known. He murmured, "We have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. We are only now beginning to comprehend the true meaning of his words." By nightfall, the Musashi, the pride of the Japanese Navy, had rolled over and sunk, taking 1,023 of her crew with her. The ship that represented the qualitative peak of Japanese naval architecture had been defeated not by a superior design, but by the sheer crushing weight of American industrial output expressed through naval air power. The birth of desperation, the kamikaze calculus, the Battle of Leyte Gulf concluded with the virtual annihilation of the Imperial Japanese Navy's offensive power. But the true, profound defeat was psychological, the shattering of the command's belief in the efficacy of conventional warfare. On October 27th, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, convened his staff at Mabalacat Airfield. The man who stood before them was not a fanatic, but a cold, calculating realist who had seen the future and found it untenable. "Gentlemen," Onishi began, "I have reviewed our losses from the past 72 hours. Of 347 aircraft committed to battle, 289 have been lost. We have fewer than 60 operational aircraft remaining. The 1st Air Fleet has been eradicated as a fighting force, yet the American fleet continues its operations unabated, its strength seemingly undiminished." He let the numbers hang in the air. The Americans lose perhaps 30 aircraft, yet their strike capacity remains constant. Why? Because they possess more aircraft than we can possibly destroy, and they replace them faster than we can shoot them down. We are fighting an enemy whose capacity to absorb losses categorically exceeds our capacity to inflict them. Lieutenant Commander Nakajima Tadashi, a veteran pilot, grasped the implication. Sir, are you suggesting that conventional tactics are no longer viable? I am stating they are obsolete. Onishi replied bluntly. When the enemy possesses a tenfold quantitative advantage and can replace losses at a rate we cannot match, courage and skill become irrelevant variables in the equation. We require a new tactical calculus, one that does not depend on the return of pilots or the maintenance of aircraft. We must maximize the damage per sortie, irrespective of the pilot's survival. The proposal was for organized suicide attacks, the kamikaze. This strategy was born not from blind fanaticism, but from a chillingly rational analysis of an impossible strategic dilemma. It was the logical, if horrific, outcome of being outproduced on an unimaginable scale. Onishi's formal proposal to Tokyo was a stark, clinical document. It argued that given the minuscule survival rates of pilots in conventional attacks, below 15%, sacrificing the possibility of return in exchange for a near-guaranteed hit was a tactically sound, even rational exchange. 9 aircraft in a conventional torpedo run might damage one ship. The same 9 aircraft, used as guided missiles, could potentially hit multiple ships. When Admiral Toyoda received the proposal, he saw its brutal logic. He asked Takagi for confirmation. Is Onishi correct? Is this our only effective option? Takagi's response was definitive. Admiral, the Americans operate approximately 90 carriers. They have over 10,000 naval aircraft. We have 4 carriers and fewer than 200 carrier-qualified pilots. Our aircraft production cannot keep pace. Furthermore, their layered air defenses, radar pickets, combat air patrols, advanced anti-aircraft fire make conventional attacks prohibitively costly. A single aircraft in a high-speed dive is far more difficult to stop. The mathematics, under these specific and dire circumstances, favor the attacker. It is the rational response to an insurmountable material disadvantage. The authorization for special attack units was issued. The order's preamble, drafted by Toyoda, was brutally honest. The enemy's material superiority has negated conventional tactics. Special attack operations represent a tactical adaptation to numerical realities we cannot otherwise overcome. On October 29th, the first official kamikaze units took off. The tactical exchange rate seemed to validate the grim calculus. But this short-term calculation ignored the long-term reality. Japan was trading its last, irreplaceable resource, trained pilots, for damage that American industry could repair in a matter of weeks. As one Japanese officer wrote in his diary, "We send these men to die because we can no longer afford to send them to fight. The Americans have made survival a luxury we cannot sustain. This is the true face of defeat." In Washington, analysts understood the implication. A U.S. intelligence summary noted, "This represents not fanaticism, but a rational, if desperate, adaptation to the resource constraints we have imposed. They understand they are losing the war of production and are now attempting to maximize the cost of our victory." The kamikaze campaign would inflict terrible damage and loss of life, but it could not alter the war's fundamental trajectory. For every U.S. ship damaged, a shipyard launched a new one. The sleeping dragon was awake, and its breath was the fire of 1,000 factories. The Imperial Japanese Navy had gambled on a short war, and in confronting the American fleet at Leyte Gulf, they discovered the horrifying, mathematical certainty of their own defeat in the long industrial war they had unwittingly begun. November 30th, 1944. The Inner Sanctum, Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo. The air in the underground conference room was thick with smoke and despair. Admiral Toyoda stood before the Supreme War Direction Council, a collection of the nation's most senior military and political leaders. The charts and graphs he presented were not merely statistics. They were an autopsy of the Imperial Navy's strategic viability. "Honorable members of the Council," Toyoda began, his voice stripped of all martial pride. "What I present to you today is not a battle report, but an economic and industrial reality that renders our current naval strategy obsolete. We have passed the point where courage or tactical ingenuity can influence the outcome." He gestured to a massive chart comparing naval construction. "In the 3 months since the Show 1 operation was conceived, American shipyards have launched more tonnage than our entire Navy possessed at the start of the war. Let me be specific. They have commissioned 2 new Essex-class fleet carriers, 4 Independence-class light carriers, 3 battleships, and over 50 destroyers and destroyer escorts. In the same period, we have managed to complete 1 light cruiser and 12 smaller combatants, many of which lack adequate radar and anti-aircraft armament." A stunned silence followed. General Yoshijiro Umezu, representing the Imperial Army, finally spoke, his voice tight. "Admiral, these numbers, if accurate, suggest an impossibility. No nation can sustain such production." "That was our fundamental error, General," Toyoda replied, nodding to Rear Admiral Takagi. "We believed it was impossible. The Americans have demonstrated it is not only possible, but routine. Their secret is not mystical. It is the systematic application of mass production principles we reserve for consumer goods to the construction of warships. They weld where we rivet. They prefabricate sections hundreds of miles inland and assemble them at coastal yards. Their workforce numbers in the millions, untouched by our bombing campaigns. We are fighting a nation that has industrialized warfare itself." Takagi stepped forward, laying photographs on the table. "These are reconnaissance images of their forward naval base at Ulithi Atoll, taken at great risk by our last long-range flying boats. You will note the anchorage contains, by our count, over 70 major warships and hundreds of auxiliaries. This is not their main fleet base. This is a temporary advance base, constructed in a matter of weeks. They can project and sustain this power anywhere in the Pacific. We, by contrast, struggle to fuel our remaining ships for sorties from the home islands." The discussion that followed was a painful admission of systemic failure. The Council moved from debating how to win the war to how to prolong it in the hope of securing a negotiated peace, a hope that every man in the room knew was faint. December 7th, 1944. 3 years after Pearl Harbor, a symbolic reckoning. On the anniversary of their triumphant attack, the Japanese High Command received a symbolic blow that underscored their predicament. U.S. Army Air Force B-29 superfortresses, operating from newly captured bases in the Marianas Islands, conducted their first major raid on the Nakajima aircraft engine plant in Tokyo. The bombers flew at an altitude beyond the reach of most Japanese interceptors and anti-aircraft fire. The message was as clear as it was brutal. American industrial power was now so vast it could not only build a fleet that dwarfed Japan's, but also construct the world's most advanced bomber and the long-range airfields needed to bring the war directly to the Japanese homeland. The very concept of Japan's defensive perimeter and the security of the home islands was shattered. Admiral Takagi, reviewing the damage reports, wrote in his journal, 3 years ago today, we sought to shatter their fleet in a single blow. Today, they have demonstrated they can bomb our industrial heart with impunity. The war has come full circle, with a terrible and final irony. Our decisive victory has been answered with their decisive capacity. The numerical disparity is no longer just a naval problem, it is a national existential crisis. January 1945. The new reality of naval combat. The lessons of Leyte Gulf were now being applied mercilessly across the theater. American fast carrier task forces, operating with a strength of 12 to 15 carriers per group, began a sustained campaign against Japanese airfields and port facilities throughout Formosa, Okinawa, and the Chinese coast. Their objective was simple: to systematically annihilate any remaining Japanese air power and isolate the home islands before the anticipated invasion. The commander of a Japanese coastal defense flotilla, watching an American carrier group from a distance, reported, "The enemy task force maintains a continuous combat air patrols of no less than 40 fighters. Their strike aircraft depart and return in waves throughout the day like clockwork. The level of coordination and the expenditure of fuel and ordnance are staggering. It is not a series of battles, it is a continuous industrial process of destruction." A new term entered the lexicon of Japanese naval officers, Jigoku no Kogai, or the Factory of Hell. It referred to the American carrier groups, which they now saw not as collections of warships, but as mobile, unstoppable industrial plants, whose sole product was devastation. The kamikaze campaign, while terrifying and destructive, was proving to be a finite resource. American destroyer screens and combat air patrols adapted, creating a deadly gauntlet that fewer and fewer suicide planes could penetrate. The loss of experienced pilots in these attacks was absolute and irreplaceable. By early 1945, the training time for a new kamikaze pilot was measured in weeks, and their ability to navigate and identify high-value targets plummeted. The rational calculus of the special attack units was collapsing as the quality of the input, the pilots and their planes, deteriorated.